Good morning, I'm Rob Young. I'm with the Issaquah Chamber of Commerce in the Government Affairs Committee. And we're here meeting Michele this morning.
Morning.
Morning. And the Greater Issaquah Chamber of Commerce is the catalyst for business growth and the convener of leaders and influencers in the champion for business growth on the east side. We advocate the business community for knowing that the business economy ensures economic vitality of the community. It's important that our local leadership and the chamber work closely together, ensuring a stable, healthy environment for business, balancing the needs of community to a realistic budget that is our top priority. The chambers compiled a series of questions for our candidates to help us establish a solid understanding of the business community's needs and understanding your perception of those needs and how you might plan to address them. Your question and answer will be recorded and shared with our community via website, YouTube, Facebook, email, newsletter, all of that.
Wonderful.
So first of all, if you could quote your name and let us know what seat you're running for.
Well, my name is Michele Kemper. I am running for City Council position number 2.
All right. And how long have you been a resident of Issaquah?
Well, Issaquah, more than 20 years. Here on the east side, more than 45 years.
Okay, super. Do you work?
I am now retired. So
Okay.
after a 35-plus year career in financial services,
Okay.
I retired as the Vice President Chief Compliance Officer.
Of what company?
It would be known as Symetra today, but it was formerly known as Safeco.
Oh, gotcha.
So-
Okay. So have you ever had any experience owning the business as a business owner?
No.
Okay. And
Well,
what
maybe I should amend that.
Okay.
I am, now that I'm retired, I've taken off my legal compliance hat and I'm into the arts. And I am a professional photographer and I do commercial photography.
Oh, okay.
But I don't
Okay.
call it a business because it probably only pays for a cup of coffee now and then.
Okay. What experience, if any, have you had as being an executive in an office or in a business, that kind of thing?
As I said, I'm retired as the Vice President, Chief Compliance Officer.
Okay.
As Vice President, those responsibilities is the hiring and managing of teams that run the day-to-day operations of the company. So Symetra is a Fortune 500, $38 billion asset company. So the operations are material.
Mm-hmm.
And so those responsibilities run the gamut from hiring, establishing workflow processes, audits, P&O, balance sheets, all of that aspect. And then as the Chief Compliance Officer, that means that I'm responsible for overseeing that the company meets all the regulatory requirements and that all the employees and our workflow processes are adhered to according to company standards. So it's a dual hat.
Gotcha. So what experience have you had dealing with budgets, profit and loss statements, and balance sheets?
That's the bread and butter of what you do when you're working with financial services industry. I actually started my career as a nurse in a hospital setting, and my goal was to actually move into hospital management, finance. So I went back to school and got my second degree in business administration and started my career in health insurance. And then from there moved into financial product. And so P&O, balance statements, and auditing companies' adherence under those was my responsibility.
Okay. So in 2 minutes, could you tell us what experience you would bring to the City Council and what qualifications you would bring to the City Council?
I think I would bring 2 aspects with my business background with a very strong sense of finance. The skill that I would bring to the table is our city's finances are in a very unique situation right now. We're suffering from something that is called a structural deficit. And a structural deficit is just a fancy term that says that we are spending more than we're bringing in. And a structural deficit happens when a city, a state, or a country is operating on all cylinders with the economy. So the economy's going great, and yet we're still spending more in expenses than we're taking in revenue, but there's no more capacity for more revenue because we're operating on all cylinders with the economy. So we're in a structural deficit. With my business background, especially in finance, I know that you cannot get out of a structural deficit by taking on more debt. The only way to get out of debt is not to take on more bonds, more debt, The only way out is to either increase your revenue, and the way our city would do that would be through taxes, or we decrease what we're spending, which means on council, it is key that we take a look at what we're projecting our projects will cost. A lot of work with the public, with the city, and with council went into deciding what these projects are that we're spending money on. So I'm not saying take the projects off the table. I'm saying we need to look at what the costs are of those and sequence them so they're within our revenue stream. So that would be one talent that I would bring. Another is my background working with state and federal regulators is I know the RCW, that's our Washington state codes. I'm very familiar with our city municipal code. It's a strange thing to be comfortable with, but I know the code. So when it comes to making decisions on council, it's not a whack-a-mole on whatever the issue of the day is. It comes down to budget, our city strategy, and what the code allows. So those would be the talents I would bring.
Okay, thank you. The chamber is a catalyst and a champion for the business community. Economic vitality of any community is reliant on a healthy business sector. As a city councilman, how would you see your relationship with the chamber and the business community?
I love that question. Before I even put my name on the ballot, the first thing I did was join the chamber. For me, that is the whole crux of the issues that we're facing now is our local business economy. If we've got doors closing on Front Street, if we've got shops that are going empty, that is a city that is imploding. That's not sustainable. The money that drives our city cannot be solely on the shoulders of property tax holders. It is a shared venture with our local business. If we don't focus on the vitality of our local business, we've got an imbalance.
Okay. It's been reported that Issaquah faces a $1.5 million deficit in 2019 and a deficit that could be as high as $5 million in 2020. Economic indicators show a slowing of the economy. We have a number of businesses closing or moving out of the area that are apparently doubling in 2019 versus 2018. These are serious challenges that will face City Council. What are your plans to balance the budget, and please include your position on B&O taxes?
Okay, so let me answer the first part of the question, which is how to balance the budget, and then I'll give you some input on B&O tax.
Sure.
Balancing the budget really comes down to either increasing revenue or decreasing expenses. That's the only two ways to balance a structural deficit. So when you take a look at increasing revenue, you really have to look at the four main sources of revenue. One is property tax, and that right now is relatively stable, but can only be increased through voter approval. The second is sales tax. That is actually in a precipitous decline. The only way to increase sales tax would be through voter approval. Increasing sales tax would put us at the highest rate within this area, also subject to voter approval. The third is B&O tax. That's at 10% of our overall monies coming in, which is over $5.5 million a year from B&O tax. Our city council increased B&O tax recently by 50%. So there's no more capacity to do additional B&O tax, and I'll give more comments on that in a minute. And then the fourth source for revenue, major source, is utility tax, sewer, water, etc. That can be increased by the city without voter approval, but that's not a real popular way to go. And surprisingly enough, our utility taxes are declining, that revenue source. So when it comes to coming out, balancing the budget, those are the four main sources of revenue, not counting federal grants and mitigation fees. Those are our four main sources for revenue. I am not in favor of raising taxes as a way to come out of a structural deficit. It will drive money away from the city, not into the city. When it comes, so I'm in favor of saving expenses by cutting projects or reprioritizing projects. On the B&O tax, that's really an interesting subject. B&O tax started back in 1933 as a way to come out of the Depression. It was a temporary federal tax. Temporary. Since then, it has been revised, and there's exceptions and all kinds of layers. It sounds real simple, but there's layers and layers of taxes that have been added onto it. In Washington State, we have an additional B&O tax. 38 or 39 cities, Issaquah is one of them, jumped on the board, and we have our own B&O tax on top of state B&O tax. Issaquah's B&O tax, like all B&O taxes, are against a company whether it makes profit or not. It's on gross product sales, whether you made any money on that widget sale or not. So in Issaquah, if an Issaquah company makes a widget and sells it in Washington, they are taxed at the wholesaler rate. If they sell that same exact widget to Wyoming or some other place out of state, they're taxed as a manufacturer, different tax rates. It drives bean counters nuts trying to keep track of what widget is going to be taxed at what rate. And B&O tax, having just been raised 50%, I'm not in favor of raising it again, but it's also because it's counterintuitive because it goes against startup companies that we're trying to drive into Issaquah. Startup company has a hard time making a profit in the first 5 years.
All right, perfect, thank you. The TIP, which is an acronym, is the top priority for the council this year, knowing that transportation is a regional concern. The recent ruling against sound transit card tab fees and our current budget concerns, where would you rate our priority on TIP in 2020, and what results would you personally like to see from it?
I have a little list here of what's in the TIP because I want to make sure I quote the numbers correctly. So the TIP, the transportation plan, is embedded inside our capital improvement plan.
Mm-hmm.
It's a 6-year plan, and on the TIP categories, the transportation issues, there's 50 projects identified. 17 of those 50 actually have numbers assigned to them on what monies will be spent over a 6-year window of time. Let me give you an example of a few of them. So 43rd and Providence Point traffic light, $6.4 million. A bike lane at the Pinch Point, $1 million. A roundabout at Central Park, $4.3 million. Gilman Boulevard, $63 million. Newport Way, there's 3 projects. Maple to Sunset, $30 million. State Route 900 to Southeast 54th, $39 million. Newport Way 54th to city limits, $46 million. And then the big one, a new I-90 crossing, $94 million. So what we have is literally half-sheet explanations as to the project and the funding with an estimate of where the money's going to come from. So take the big one, the $94 million I-90 crossing. These can only be funded 3 ways. You can go to general fund, like the plan is for the Providence Point traffic light. That's like taking it out of your savings account. We already drew down our savings account 40% in 2019. We're going to draw it down again in 2020. Soon there won't be any left. Another way to fund it is taking out a bond. That's like a home equity loan. The city has a debt. So to get out of debt, we'd be taking on more debt. That doesn't seem reasonable. And then another way is with federal grants. So on that $94 million I-90 crossing, there's an estimate, a thought that we will get $72 million back in federal grants for it. Federal grants and mitigation. Wonderful. But 94 to 72 leaves $22 million left on the table for Issaquah taxpayers. That's the kind of detail that I think council should be informed on. Where's the revenue to come from to fund that $22 million? Is it taking on a bond, more debt? Is it coming out of our savings account? We need more detail than just a half page.
Okay. What is your perception of the permitting process in Issaquah, and how do you see that it can be improved?
Permitting process. I've done some talking with our local businesses to try and understand what the permit process is, and the one thing that keeps coming up is the 120-day cycle from the time you put your application in. That's when I think the clock should start, and when you have your occupancy permit should be when the clock turns off. That's the 120 days. But it can start and stop every time there's a hand up saying I need more detail. So when the applicant puts the application in, the clock starts, and the city sends back within a week to 10 days a letter saying you're either okay to go or I need more information. And it seems like the predominant reason for more information has 2 main themes. That's environment impact and traffic. And it seems to me if those are the 2 primary reasons to stop the clock and get more information, there should be some type of a process with the city that can actually work with the developer or with the applicant to understand if those are my 2 primary pinch points in this clock. Let's streamline that a little easier. Especially in our environment, there's less and less land available for developing, so the land that is there is on a slope, near a stream, it has more impact issues, so the number of projects that have to be delayed for more information is gone up dramatically.
Gotcha.
So I think streamline. Oh, and then one more point. I think
Sure.
The application process is not unique to Issaquah. We should be looking at best practices with other cities that have similar structures, and let's adopt best practices. We don't have to invent it from scratch.
Right. So the state is evaluating changes to the overtime rules. L&I's current proposal is to increase the threshold for executives, administration, and professionals that earn over $23,660, which is the federal guidelines, or $13,000 for state guidelines, to what the state has proposed to do $80,000 by 2026. So there's a big difference. Does business support an increase to this threshold, and given it hasn't been increased for a while, and if so, what would they recommend?
This threshold was set more than 40 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
It is woefully out of date. In the last 4 decades, minimum wage has changed. The designation of what is a exempt and non-exempt employee, white collar, hourly wage difference, using old vernacular, has changed over those 40 years. So we're seeing more and more employees who are being designated as exempt, meaning white collar, no overtime, and yet with the amount of hours that they're working, they're actually taking home less than minimum wage when they're enforced overtime. So it's 40 years old. Those benchmarks need to be updated and be current with where we're at today with minimum wage.
Okay. Last one is, we'd like to thank you for your time today, and we want to leave this last question open-ended so that you can answer it and speak directly to the business community. If you were elected to City Council, please tell the business community what you would do to support business and to ensure economic vitality.
Okay. Well, I think first is a strategy. I think our business, council, and chamber and the Economic Vitality Commission should actually have a cohesive, agreed-to strategy on how we're going to be increasing the business vitality. This isn't up to one council person. This is a consortium of all of us working together on this. And when you have a strategy, you can measure progress against it, and you're not debating every single change you want to make. It's part of the strategy. Second, I would like to see us hire locally. I would like to see job fairs supported by the city and by the chamber, which we're already doing. I'd like to see more of that. I actually attended one. They're fabulous. I'd like to see more of a focus on hiring locally. Yes, I know that affordable housing and transportation are issues, but you can't work on these sequentially. They have to be worked on concurrently. If you don't have employment, it's hard. They're all interrelated. So to say we don't have affordable housing, I can't do hiring, that's the wrong approach. We need to work on all at the same time. I think job training, I think there would be a wonderful opportunity for the chamber to bring in local community colleges and other sources that can put on training programs for our small businesses in this area. I think we should also be working very strongly to recruit a big guy. So another major employer who can have their headquarters here, especially one that's maybe into e-commerce and is using decentralized employees, then we get the tax base of that corporate. We're in a wonderful setting here. This would be a great place for a corporate headquarters, and we have the buildings that can house one. That's an active recruiting. But the big guy is just to get that tax base coming in. We can't lose track of the fact that it's the small business. I think the number is something like 97% of all jobs are with small businesses in the U.S. We can't turn our back on the small business. That's the soul of Issaquah. And I want to see whether that is something including incentives to have a small business be in our central business plan, or what do they call it, the CBD, something that will bring the small businesses in.
Well, thank you, Michele.
Thank you.
Very nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.